You and I have the power to end Richard Nixon's failed war on drugs once and for all. In fact, it's our constitutional right to do so. Imagine for a second that you've been selected as a juror for a trial of someone like, for example, Jacob Lavaro, a 19-year-old Austin, Texas man currently facing anywhere from 5 years to life in prison for making 1.5 pounds of pop brownies. You know that based on all the evidence presented by the prosecution that the defendant's probably guilty. But you and other jurors in the case have serious doubts about convicting him because you know that doing so is going to ruin his life. You're trapped. The law says one thing, your conscience says another. So what do? Easy. You use your power of jury nullification. You declare the defendant not guilty regardless of the evidence and let him walk free, nullifying the unjust or unfair law. Just like the Supreme Court has the power to strike down laws, you too, as an American citizen, have the power to reject laws when you're serving on a jury. You can essentially become your very own Supreme Court and strike down or ignore laws that you don't like. Now, it only applies to the case before you. It doesn't go general like with the real Supreme Court, but you can do it. If you haven't heard of jury nullification before, it's not all that surprising. The powers that be really don't want anyone to know about it because it represents a direct threat to the status quo. Defense lawyers, for example, are not allowed to talk about a jury's right to nullify during a trial. And saying that you know about nullification is actually one of the easiest ways to get bounced out of jury duty altogether. In fact, they'll empty the room of anybody who even heard you talk about it. In some cases, people who spread the word about jury nullification have even been accused of committing a crime. Just 3 years ago, for example, federal prosecutors in Manhattan charged a 78-year-old former chemistry professor named Julian Hecklin with jury tampering for handing out flyers outside a courthouse that informed jurors of their right to nullify. But however much they try, the authorities will never actually be able to stop people from using their jury nullification powers. That's because the right to nullify is given to us by the 6th Amendment to the Constitution, the same part of the Bill of Rights that gives us the right to a trial by jury. It was first affirmed back in 1794 and then again in 1895. Judge Jerry E. Smith of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals made this clear in an opinion he wrote just earlier this month, deciding the case of United States of America versus Juan Agustin Salazar. According to Judge Smith, when a Texas judge ordered a jury to find Juan Salazar guilty, after all he had confessed to drug and gun charges, that judge violated Salazar's right to have a jury decide whether he was guilty or innocent. Keep in mind, this guy had confessed. As Smith wrote, the 6th Amendment safeguards even an obviously guilty defendant's right to have a jury decide guilt or innocence. When you really think about it, jury nullification is among the most important rights we have as Americans. It gives us the power and freedom to say no to unjust laws. It gives us, we the people, the final say over what kind of laws we want enforced. Now, it has a kind of sketchy history. Jury nullification was very well known in the Deep South from the 1870s through the 1940s, because very often white people charged with the crime of lynching black people, when they got before a jury of white people, the jury would nullify the law of murder. It happened over and over again in the South. But since the 1950s, pretty much nobody's talking about it. And with Nixon's failed war on drugs now in its 43rd year, it's never been more important for Americans to understand that we still have this immense power. Ever since Nixon declared a war on drugs in 1971, the incarceration rate has skyrocketed. As a result, the United States now imprisons more people than any other country in the world. This is costing us billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, according to the Washington Post, over the past 20 years, spending on incarceration at the state level has outpaced budget increases for just about every other function of government, including education, transportation, and welfare. Only spending on Medicaid at the state level has grown faster. And because people of color are disproportionately arrested, imprisoned, and charged with drug crimes, the war on drugs has stunted a lot of the progress we've made since the 1960s. Mass incarceration has become such a problem for people of color that legal expert Michelle Alexander now calls it the new Jim Crow. Thankfully, Washington has started to wake up to the failure of the war on drugs. Attorney General Eric Holder, for example, has made sentencing reform one of his major second-term initiatives. But sentencing reform only gets us so far. Every year, hundreds of thousands of Americans are sent to prison, sometimes even for life, for possessing or selling harmless drugs like pot. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. Americans need to start exercising their constitutionally provided power of jury nullification when it comes to nonviolent drug crimes. In lieu of a law passed by Congress, it's the single best way to stop mass incarceration and end Nixon's failed war on drugs once and for all. To paraphrase Nancy Reagan, it's time for all of us to just say no to convicting anyone of a nonviolent drug crime. And that's the way it is tonight, Monday, May 27th, 2014.